Hey, Alicia Novin here, and today I wanted to talk about 9 non-coding things for you to focus on when you're at work. Here we go. Too often I'll hear developers talk about how the important thing is writing great code and always writing really impressive code, and that's how you'll get noticed, that's how you'll grow. And the truth is that while writing great code is really important, it's also not the only thing you want to focus on. There's other aspects that you want to make sure you are doing in a professional setting to make sure that you're contributing to your overall growth. So here we go with 9 things. Number 1. Obviously, you don't need to explain the importance of communication, but I will say this, that regardless of whether you're talking to someone who's technical or non-technical, a peer, a manager, someone in leadership, someone on the business side, focus your communication around an impact of some sort. It could be an impact about the dates or the timelines or to a number of customers. Whatever it is, if you can speak to the impact and quantify that impact, that's really key. And you don't have to worry too much about the precision of that number that you're providing in that impact. Most people more focus on the order of magnitude that you're talking about or the scale rather than the exact number. And you can also say that when you're talking about how you're quantifying it. But the point is that as developers, we want to really focus on all the details of the problem space, and we want to give all of the information and the scenario, and we paint a very vivid picture. But too often that provides way too much information and people lose sight of it. So focus on the impact and then let the details come out in a type of question and answer. The person will definitely ask you some more questions to get the details, but if you start with the impact, then people are focusing on the right thing. The second one is still about communication. So after you've stated your impact, you're obviously communicating that impact to someone for some reason. It could be that you're escalating, it could be that it's an FYI to them and no action is needed, or you're making an ask out of them. So state that explicitly. Especially if it's an FYI, state FYI, no action needed, and then tell them the situation as succinctly as possible. If it's an ask, explicitly state that you're making an ask and what you need, and otherwise rely on them again to ask any questions for further details. Way too often I hear developers talk about how they don't have a really good relationship with their managers. And your manager is ultimately what determines your success in your role at that company. And that's something that you want to actively fix. So especially if you're new in the organization, get to know your manager. You should be having regular one-on-ones that are scheduled, that are on the calendar, and you know when they're going to happen. And you should be the one who drives the content of those one-on-ones. So focus on your growth, challenges that you are having, or things that you would need out of your manager, and prioritize those kinds of things in that setting so that they know what's important to you. There are also great opportunities to know how your manager works, so how they prioritize things, how they communicate, how they want to get good news and bad news. It should be an opportunity for them to raise any of their concerns, but also give you great feedback to help you keep doing what you're doing and how to reinforce the stuff that you're doing well. So get to know your manager and don't find yourself in a situation where your manager is just someone that you see maybe once in a while, but you're not getting regular feedback from them about how you're progressing. Similarly, you want to get to know your team. Just like you should be forming a relationship with your manager, form a relationship with the individuals on your team. You don't want to have that sense of it just being a group of individuals. A team is one where people help each other out. They have each other's back. They contribute to each other's growth in terms of knowledge, in terms of problem space, in terms of being critical with one another in a positive and constructive way. And so you want to get to know your team because, again, you want to know how they communicate, what works for them, what the dynamics are of that overall team, so that together you are better off and you're all growing together. You want to be a team player. And that's one of those ambiguous management-y kind of terms that gets thrown around, just like culture does. And the thing for me is that when you think about culture isn't something that the manager defines. In fact, the manager shouldn't be the one contributing to the culture. It should be defined by the individuals that make up that team. the unique aspect of who they are and what they all collaboratively decide are their shared interests, their shared values. And so if the manager does that, they're playing the wrong kind of role. It should be something that arises naturally and organically by people who are part of that team. But to do that, you have to be actively part of the team. So that's what means being a team player. So when there's a team lunch or a team event or just something that the team is doing collectively as a whole, you don't want to be the one who's not a part of that, because then you're not contributing to that. So the question is, why would any of this matter? And again, can't I just write code? Because I'd much rather do that, and that should prove my value by writing great code. The thing is that when you're part of a team, that ability to collaborate, that ability to trust one another, to devise the better solution as a group and criticize each other and understand how to help each other out when there's a challenge or when there's a disagreement. Or importantly, oftentimes someone has something going on personally in their lives and they're only able to contribute at 60% their normal capacity. When you have a strong, cohesive team, team members help each other out. And to do that, it requires that everybody contribute actively to that sense of what the team is. Keeping in line with this whole theme of team and building a strong, cohesive team, you need to be able to criticize with care. And offering constructive criticism can be one of the most challenging things when you're trying to do it right. You can criticize carelessly, and that's pretty easy, but you'll definitely not build that stronger team if you're doing that. But when you provide constructive criticisms, you're being honest and transparent, and you're building that connection with the team. And you're also producing better results, because now people aren't sweeping things under the rug, they're not ignoring issues, but they're actually surfacing them and working on them together. So how do you criticize someone with care? And I think that is pretty difficult to just answer in a universal way, because different people respond to things differently. One thing I'll say that will definitely help, though, is you want to focus on specific details of the thing you're criticizing. Anytime you're being more general, the person's probably going to take it more personally. So imagine they've drawn a picture of a dog. Rather than just say, oh, that doesn't look like a dog at all, focus on specific things that they could do to improve that drawing of theirs. You might say that, oh, the ears are not pointy enough, or the tail is a little too droopy. You should have it curve this way so it looks like it's wagging its tail. And now that person has some action items and know where they need to focus on to improve their overall drawing of that dog. Same thing goes with code, right? You want to focus on those areas of the code base where they cut some corners or they might have made a mistake in their design. And in doing so, one, they'll grow. Two, they'll understand that you are someone that is criticizing with care, so you want to see better results out of them, and they will work harder to be able to produce better code and be a part of that team. One of the easiest things to criticize is code. And it's so easy to criticize that we sometimes can be unfair about it because we don't have the context for why the code is in the shape that it's in. Anytime you're dealing with a legacy code base, there are a lot of reasons why the code became the way it is. Maybe they were under a time crunch. Maybe they didn't have the right kind of requirements because they didn't have the right person in the role to gather the requirements. Whatever it is, it's important to know the history of the code and how it got to be to where it is, so that way not only are you identifying ways in which the code can be improved, but also the business challenges and the things that the team has had to deal with, so that you can keep an eye out for them and maybe you can provide suggestions on how, as a group, they can do better overall. So when you're criticizing that legacy code base, again, don't think of it in the specifics of, why was it done this way? Because maybe everyone knows why they did it that way and they don't feel proud of it, but it was the only option they had at the time. Instead, you want to focus on what were the factors that caused the code to be written that way, and that way you've got a more specific problem to tackle. Maybe you're not a product person or UX engineer or UI designer or a marketing person. You're just writing code, yet you still should know who your end user is and what drives them. When we're writing code, you can think of it as a very sterile lab-like environment, and so it's not in real-world settings. Maybe your end user is on a spotty connection, or maybe there's a lot of distractions when they're using your software. Whatever that is, the better you know the circumstances that your user will be using your software, the better you know who your user is, the better choices you will make when you are breaking the user story down, when you are working with the product person to define the requirements, and you'll end up building a better product overall. And then lastly, you want to get to know your market, your industry that you're in. Especially if you're in an industry that's really well defined and maybe even regulated, like the healthcare industry or the financial industry. The more you understand the requirements of that industry and the way it works, the better you'll understand the business requirements and why the application is being built a certain way and why it's designed a certain way. You'll be able to make better choices and more important choices when it comes to security aspects of how you're building the software, and better design choices so that when you're architecting the solution, you know how it's going to change and how it's going to be rigid and how long that software is going to be used because of how slow or fast that industry will change over time. So knowing your industry and knowing how it works, knowing the end users will all help you make better choices, especially as you transition more from a junior person to an intermediate and a senior person, and you're more involved on those design decisions. So that's it. Those are the 9 non-coding things to focus on when you're at work. And it's not to say that writing great code is not the most important aspect of your job, but it's also not the only aspect of your job. A lot of managers, a lot of companies will focus on how well someone does their core functions, but they'll also look at these other details to see how well are they growing. And if you focus on these areas, you'll put yourself on a better path for growth. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it helpful. Really interested to hear your thoughts. And lastly, I'll just say that I'm running a podcast called Increments, and it's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. I hope you'll check it out. It's all about how we create the space for our own growth and think intentionally about certain questions that'll help us drive and become better coders overall. I hope you'll check it out, and thanks a lot.